The courtroom falls silent as a teenage girl steps up to the witness stand. All eyes are on her, the tension so thick it's suffocating. Then with a steady voice, she speaks just 3 words. Words so shocking, the judge's face turns pale, and his gavel slams down. "Recess," he declares, his voice shaking. What could she have said to bring an entire courtroom to a standstill? Stay tuned to uncover the jaw-dropping truth behind her statement, because nothing in this case is what it seems. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Every seat was filled, the air thick with tension as murmurs bounced off the cold, imposing walls. Lawyers shuffled papers, the hum of whispered strategy barely audible over the heavy silence that hung in the air. The wooden doors creaked open, and Ava Harper stepped in, her small frame dwarfed by the magnitude of the moment. She was 16, but the burden in her eyes made her look older. The sharp clicks of her shoes echoed against the marble floor as she approached the witness stand, her head held high despite the tremble in her fingers. Judge Bennett watched her closely, his expression a mask of neutrality, but Ava caught the faintest flicker of something. Recognition. Fear. She wasn't sure, but she held his gaze as she was sworn in. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" asked the clerk. Ava's voice was steady as she answered, "I do." Yet beneath her calm tone, her heart pounded like a war drum, each beat threatening to drown out the questions she had rehearsed 1,000 times in her head. The prosecutor, Laura Kane, rose from her chair, her tailored suit crisp and commanding. She approached Ava with measured steps, her every movement designed to exude control. "Miss Harper," she began, her voice smooth, almost gentle. "Can you confirm your relationship to the late Rachel Harper?" "Yes," Ava replied, her voice clear but low. "She was my mother." "And your mother was employed as an accountant at Cross Enterprises, is that correct?" Laura continued, her sharp gaze scanning Ava's face for any sign of hesitation. Ava nodded. "She worked there for 8 years. Laura's questions started simply enough, outlining the facts of the case. Rachel Harper's position, the record she handled, the suspicious discrepancies she'd reported before her untimely death. Ava answered carefully, her words measured and precise. She could feel the eyes of the jury on her, the quiet scrutiny of strangers dissecting her every word, every expression. But Ava wasn't afraid of them. Her fear was reserved for the man sitting across the room, William Cross. He was an imposing figure, his expensive suit tailored to perfection, his expression unreadable. His lawyer, Gregory Roth, smirked with a confidence that made Ava's stomach churn. He leaned back in his chair, whispering something to Cross, who didn't respond. His gaze was fixed on Ava, his dark eyes piercing, unblinking. "And you believe," Laura pressed, her voice growing firmer, "that your mother's death was not an accident?" Ava hesitated. She knew this was the moment they were waiting for, the moment the courtroom would turn on her if she faltered, but she couldn't falter. She looked directly at Laura, then at Judge Bennett, her voice ringing out with conviction. "It wasn't an accident. She was killed." The room erupted into murmurs. The jurors shifted uncomfortably, exchanging uneasy glances. Roth leaned forward, his smirk gone. Even Cross blinked, his expression tightening. Judge Bennett rapped his gavel sharply, the sound slicing through the tension like a blade. "Order," he barked. The murmurs subsided, but the air grew heavier, charged with curiosity and disbelief. Laura stepped closer to Ava, her tone softening. "Why do you believe that, Ava? What evidence do you have?" Ava took a deep breath, her fingers curling around the edge of the witness stand. Her eyes scanned the room, pausing briefly on Cross, then on the judge. "Because she left something for me, evidence that ties William Cross to her death and others." Her voice dropped to a chilling calm as she added, "And she warned me to be careful, because powerful people were involved." Judge Bennett stiffened in his seat. For a fraction of a second, his hand froze mid-motion as he reached for his gavel. Ava caught it, the crack in his composure, the shift in his usually impassive face. He recovered quickly, clearing his throat and gesturing for Laura to continue. But Ava wasn't done. She turned her gaze fully to Bennett, her voice sharper now, cutting through the courtroom like a blade. "You know what I'm talking about, don't you, Judge?" she said, her words deliberate, heavy with accusation. The room froze. Bennett's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing, but before he could respond, Ava spoke again. "It's your fault." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate. Gasps rippled through the crowd, the tension breaking into outright chaos. Bennett's face went pale, his hand gripping the gavel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, his usual commanding presence shattered. Finally, he slammed the gavel down with a loud crack, his voice unsteady as he barked, "Recess!" 15 minutes. Ava watched him rise quickly, his robes sweeping behind him as he hurried out of the room without another word. Her hands were trembling, but she kept her expression calm. She had planted the seed, and now she had to wait for it to grow. As murmurs filled the room once more, Ava allowed herself a single glance at Cross. He wasn't smiling anymore. The courtroom was alive with chaotic murmurs as Ava stepped down from the witness stand. Her legs felt shaky, but she held her head high, her expression betraying no sign of the storm brewing inside her. Every eye in the room followed her as she made her way to her seat. The whispers of onlookers and the frantic rustling of papers from both legal teams filled the air. Gregory Roth, Cross's attorney, leaned toward his client, his voice low but urgent. Whatever he was saying, it wasn't calming Cross. The CEO sat rigid, his jaw clenched, a bead of sweat visible on his temple despite the courtroom's chill. Ava felt her heart pounding in her chest, but she forced herself to focus. She couldn't let fear show, not now. She glanced at Laura Kane, who was flipping through her notes with a furrowed brow. The prosecutor's confident facade had faltered slightly, her sharp gaze darting between Ava and the judge's empty seat. Laura didn't expect this, Ava realized. She doesn't know what to do next. A hand brushed her shoulder, and Ava turned to see her court-appointed mentor, Detective Eliza Moreno. Eliza, a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and a weathered demeanor, crouched beside her. "What the hell was that, Ava?" Eliza whispered, her voice low but charged with intensity. "I told the truth," Ava replied, her tone firm, though her voice trembled slightly at the edges. "You didn't just tell the truth. You practically accused a judge of being complicit in a murder?" Eliza hissed. "Do you know how dangerous that is? How much power he has?" Ava met her gaze, her eyes steady despite the whirlwind of emotions roiling beneath the surface. "Do you know how dangerous it was for my mom to go against William Cross?" she shot back. "She did it anyway." Eliza exhaled sharply, glancing over her shoulder to ensure no one was eavesdropping. "Ava, this isn't about being brave. This is about being smart. Cross and Bennett, these men don't play by the rules. You think you've got them on the ropes, but they'll turn this around on you before you even see it coming." Ava leaned closer, lowering her voice. "They already tried to turn it around. My mom is dead. My brother and I almost didn't make it out alive after that car accident. If I back down now, what happens next? Who else do they silence?" Eliza stared at her, her sharp features softening slightly. "You're tougher than you look, kid," she muttered, standing up and stepping away. "But don't think for a second that this is over. Watch your back." The recess dragged on as the tension in the courtroom refused to dissipate. Conversations buzzed like static electricity, every spectator speculating on the meaning behind Ava's words. Meanwhile, Roth huddled with Cross, gesturing emphatically as he whispered in the man's ear. Cross's expression grew darker with every word, his posture stiff and unyielding. Finally, Cross stood abruptly, straightening his tie with a sharp tug and making his way toward the exit. Roth scrambled to follow him, but Cross waved him off with a single impatient gesture. Laura Kane's voice broke the hum of whispers. "Miss Harper," she called, her tone edged with urgency. Ava turned to see the prosecutor approaching, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. "You've just thrown a grenade into the middle of this case. I need to know what you're holding on to, and I need to know it now." "I already said what I needed to say," Ava replied evenly, though she felt the weight of Laura's piercing gaze. "The evidence speaks for itself." "Don't play games with me," Laura snapped, lowering her voice but leaning in close. You've accused one of the most powerful men in this state of murder, and now you've implicated a sitting judge in a cover-up. I'm trying to help you, but if you're withholding anything, it could blow this whole case wide open." Ava hesitated, her mind racing. Could she trust Laura? The prosecutor seemed determined to bring Cross down, but Ava knew how easily alliances could shift under pressure. Finally, she met Laura's gaze, her voice low. "There's more, but I'm not giving it all away yet." Laura's eyes narrowed. "What are you waiting for? A bigger stage? Do you understand what's at stake here?" "I do," Ava said, her tone hardening. "That's why I can't rush this. If I move too fast, they'll bury me, just like they buried my mom." Before Laura could respond, the courtroom doors opened and Judge Bennett re-entered, his face an impassive mask. He took his seat without looking at anyone, the gavel resting loosely in his hand. "Court is back in session," he announced, his voice steady but lacking its usual authority. He avoided Ava's gaze, focusing instead on the lawyers. Ms. Kane, Mr. Roth approached the bench. As the lawyers gathered at the judge's desk, Ava felt a chill run down her spine. Whatever they were discussing, it wasn't good. She couldn't shake the feeling that the ground beneath her was shifting, and the battle she thought she was prepared for was about to take an even darker turn. Ava's fingers gripped the edge of the table in front of her as she watched the quiet, tense conversation unfolding at the judge's bench. Laura Kane stood tall, her body angled sharply as she gestured subtly, her expression firm but composed. Gregory Roth, on the other hand, had a smugness about him that made Ava's skin crawl. Whatever he was saying to Judge Bennett, it was clear he thought he had the upper hand. The judge's face remained stoic, but Ava noticed the subtle twitch in his jaw, the slight shift of his fingers as they tapped rhythmically against the bench. He was struggling to maintain control. Ava wasn't sure if it was fear, guilt, or some combination of both, but it told her one thing. Her words had struck a nerve. She stole a glance at Eliza Moreno, who sat a few rows behind her in the gallery. The detective's expression was unreadable, but her eyes were locked on the judge, watching him as intently as Ava was. Eliza gave Ava the smallest nod, a silent reassurance. Ava swallowed hard and tried to steady her breathing. It wasn't over yet. The hushed conversation at the bench continued for another agonizing minute before Judge Bennett finally leaned back in his chair and raised his gavel. "We will proceed," he announced, his voice calm but clipped. "Ms. Kane, you may call your next witness." Laura nodded curtly and turned back toward her table, but as she moved, her gaze lingered on Ava, a flicker of concern crossing her face. Ava didn't have time to think about what it meant before Gregory Roth spoke up, his tone sharp and deliberate. "Your Honor, before the prosecution continues, I'd like to formally request that Miss Harper's testimony be stricken from the record." His voice carried across the courtroom, drawing immediate attention. Roth turned to the jury, his words carefully chosen to make them question everything Ava had said. "The witness has made unsubstantiated claims, including baseless accusations against this court, which I believe are intended solely to derail the proceedings and prejudice the jury against my client." Ava's heart skipped a beat. Roth's words hit her like a slap, but she kept her face neutral, refusing to let him see her panic. He was trying to discredit her, to paint her as unreliable. It wasn't unexpected, but it still felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. Laura stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. "Objection, Your Honor," she said, her voice firm. "Miss Harper's testimony is directly relevant to this case. The evidence she has provided is consistent with—" "What evidence?" Roth interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "The prosecution has yet to produce a single piece of corroborating evidence to support these wild allegations. If there is any evidence, why hasn't it been presented?" Laura opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Ava stood. The room went silent, all eyes turning to her as she took a step forward. Her voice, though quiet, was steady and deliberate. "You want evidence?" she said, her gaze locking onto Roth. "I have it. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, the jury leaning forward in their seats. Roth's confident demeanor faltered, his smirk replaced by a wary glare. "If you have evidence," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "then why hasn't it been submitted to the court?" Ava's jaw tightened. She knew she was walking a fine line, but she refused to back down. "Because it's not safe yet," she said. "If I show my hand too early, it'll disappear, just like my mother's case files, just like the witnesses who tried to come forward before me." Judge Bennett's gavel slammed down, silencing the rising commotion. "Miss Harper," he said, his voice stern, "you will not disrupt this court with unverified claims. If you have evidence, it must be submitted through the proper channels." "I will," Ava said, meeting his gaze, "but not until I know it'll be seen by someone who isn't part of this cover-up." The room erupted into chaos. The jurors whispered furiously among themselves, the spectators murmuring louder than before. Gregory Roth's face darkened, his polished composure slipping into outright anger. Judge Bennett slammed his gavel again, his voice cutting through the noise. "Order! I will have order in this court." Ava sat back down, her heart hammering in her chest. She could feel the weight of every stare, every word hanging in the air. She wasn't sure if she'd just made things better or worse. But one thing was certain. There was no turning back now. As the courtroom slowly quieted, Judge Bennett leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he addressed the lawyers. "This court will adjourn for the day. Counsel, I expect any evidence in this case to be submitted immediately for review. No further delays will be tolerated." With a final crack of the gavel, he stood and exited the room, his robes billowing behind him. Ava watched him go, a knot tightening in her stomach. She had taken the first step, but the real fight was just beginning. The courtroom emptied slowly, people lingering in small groups as they whispered about the explosive events of the day. Ava stayed seated, her eyes fixed on the now vacant judge's bench. Her mind raced with everything that had just happened, but she forced herself to stay calm. This was far from over, and she couldn't afford to lose focus. Laura Kane approached her, her lips pressed into a tight line. The prosecutor's usually confident demeanor was tinged with frustration. "We need to talk," she said sharply, motioning for Ava to follow her to a quieter corner of the room. Ava rose without a word, trailing behind her. Once they were away from prying ears, Laura turned, her voice low but intense. "What the hell was that?" she asked, her hands resting on her hips. "You just accused the judge of being part of a cover-up, in open court. Do you have any idea what kind of backlash that could bring?" "I said what needed to be said," Ava replied, meeting Laura's gaze evenly. "If I hadn't, Roth would have torn me apart. He's already trying to discredit me. I couldn't just sit there and let him do it." Laura ran a hand through her hair, exhaling sharply. "This isn't a game, Ava. If you want justice for your mom, you have to play this smart. Going after Judge Bennett like that? It's a risk we can't afford unless we have rock-solid proof." "I have proof," Ava said firmly, "but I can't give it to you yet. Not until I know it'll be safe." Laura's eyes narrowed. "And what exactly does that mean? Are you telling me there's evidence out there that you haven't shared with me? Because if there is, I need to know. Now." Ava hesitated. She wanted to trust Laura, but she couldn't ignore the nagging voice in the back of her mind warning her to be cautious. "I can't explain everything right now," she said carefully, "but I promise when the time is right you'll have what you need." Laura sighed, her frustration evident. "You're asking me to put my career on the line for you, Ava. If you're holding back, it could cost us everything." "Then I guess you'll have to trust me," Ava said quietly. "Just like my mom trusted the system, and look where that got her." Laura's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue further. Instead, she nodded curtly and stepped away, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she returned to her team. Ava watched her go, a knot of guilt twisting in her stomach. She didn't want to alienate Laura, but she also knew that keeping some things close to her chest was the only way to stay ahead of Cross and his allies. "Brave words for a kid who's walking a tightrope without a net," came a familiar voice from behind her, Ava turned to see Eliza Moreno leaning casually against a nearby column, her arms crossed. The detective's sharp eyes studied Ava with a mixture of admiration and concern. "I didn't have a choice," Ava said, her voice softer now that they were alone. "They're trying to make me look like a liar. If I don't push back, I lose." Eliza nodded slowly. "Fair point. But you're making powerful enemies, Ava. People like Cross don't just play dirty. They rewrite the rules." "I know," Ava said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "But I'm not afraid of them." Eliza raised an eyebrow. "You should be. Fear keeps you sharp. It makes you careful." Ava didn't respond. She wasn't sure if it was bravery or recklessness driving her at this point, but she knew one thing. She couldn't let herself falter. Not now. "Come on," Eliza said, pushing off the column. "Let's get out of here. I'll walk you to your car. Last thing we need is Cross pulling something shady in the parking lot." The mention of Cross sent a chill down Ava's spine, but she nodded and followed Eliza out of the courthouse. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the pavement as they walked in silence. Ava's mind churned with thoughts of what would come next. She knew the judge would try to shut her down, that Roth would double down on his efforts to discredit her, and that Cross wouldn't stop until he silenced her for good. But she also knew she had something they didn't, a truth too big to bury. All she had to do was survive long enough to bring it to light. The parking lot stretched out in front of them, dimly lit by flickering streetlights that cast long, uneven shadows across the pavement. The air was crisp and still, but Ava couldn't shake the unease prickling at the back of her neck. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see Cross or one of his men lurking in the shadows, but the lot appeared empty. Eliza walked beside her, her hand resting lightly on the badge clipped to her belt. Her presence was reassuring, but Ava could sense the tension radiating from the detective. Eliza was alert, scanning their surroundings with the practiced eye of someone who had seen far too many bad endings. As they reached Ava's car, Eliza paused and looked around one last time before turning to her. "You need to be careful, Ava," she said, her voice low but firm. "People like Cross don't just wait for things to play out in court. If they think you're a threat, they'll come after you." "I know," Ava replied, unlocking her car. Her fingers trembled slightly as she gripped the handle, but she kept her voice steady. "That's why I have to keep moving. If I stop, if I let them scare me into silence, they win." Eliza studied her for a moment, her sharp eyes softening. "You're a brave kid," she said finally. "Braver than most adults I know. But bravery doesn't mean much if you're not around to finish what you started. Keep your head down, and don't take any risks you don't have to." Ava nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I'll be careful." Eliza stepped back, giving Ava room to get into the car, but as Ava slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, Eliza leaned down and tapped on the window. Ava rolled it down, and the detective lowered her voice. "If anything feels off, anything, you call me, day or night, understand?" "Got it," Ava said, managing a small, grateful smile. "Thanks, Eliza." The detective nodded and straightened up, watching as Ava pulled out of the parking spot and headed toward the exit. Ava kept her eyes on the road, but her mind was racing. She didn't doubt Eliza's warning. Cross was a man who played by his own rules, and she'd just painted a target on her back by accusing him in court. The thought sent a shiver through her, but she pushed it aside. Fear wouldn't help her now. As she drove through the quiet streets, the glow of the streetlights blurring in her peripheral vision, Ava's thoughts drifted to her mother. Rachel Harper had been fearless too, brilliant, meticulous, and unshakably principled, but even she hadn't been able to outmaneuver Cross. Ava tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her jaw clenched. She wouldn't let her mother's fight end in silence. Not again. She was halfway home when she noticed the headlights in her rearview mirror. At first, she didn't think much of it. The car was keeping a respectable distance, its speed matching hers. But as the minutes passed, Ava's unease grew. Every turn she made, the car followed. It was subtle, just far enough behind to seem like coincidence, but Ava's instincts told her otherwise. Her palms began to sweat, and her heart raced as she gripped the wheel tighter. She took another turn, this one sharper, leading into a quiet residential neighborhood. The car stayed behind her. Her pulse quickened. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to be discreet anymore. Ava's mind raced. She couldn't lead them to her house, not with Ethan there. Her eyes darted around, searching for an escape. Up ahead, she spotted a gas station, its neon sign flickering in the dark. The parking lot was nearly empty, but the bright lights and the lone attendant visible inside made it her best option. She turned sharply into the gas station, her tires squealing slightly on the pavement. The car behind her hesitated for a moment before continuing straight down the road, its tail lights disappearing into the night. Ava exhaled shakily, her grip on the wheel loosening. For a moment, relief flooded through her, but it was short-lived. She pulled into a parking spot and sat there, her hands trembling as she tried to steady her breathing. The gas station attendant, a bored-looking teenager, glanced at her through the window, but didn't seem to register her distress. Ava scanned the area, her eyes darting to every shadow, every corner of the lot. The car was gone, but the fear lingered. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder, startling her. She snatched it up and saw a text from an unknown number. Her stomach dropped as she read the message. "Nice detour, but we'll find you." Ava's blood ran cold. Her fingers hovered over the screen, but she didn't know what to do. Her first instinct was to call Eliza, but a voice in the back of her mind told her to wait. Whoever had sent the message wanted her to panic, to make a mistake. She couldn't let them control her. Taking a deep breath, Ava composed herself. She locked her doors and drove away from the gas station, her mind sharper than ever. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was survival. Whatever game Cross was playing, Ava was determined to beat him at it. The tires hummed against the pavement as Ava drove through the quiet streets, her mind racing faster than her car. The text on her phone seemed to taunt her from the passenger seat. The words burned into her memory. "Nice detour, but we'll find you." She glanced at the device again, as if the message might disappear, but it remained. A cruel reminder that Cross and his people were watching her every move. She turned off the main road and onto a quieter street, the houses sparsely spaced and the streetlights dim. Her grip tightened on the steering wheel as her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, scanning for headlights. The road behind her was empty, but the uneasy weight in her chest wouldn't lift. Every shadow felt sharper, every sound more menacing. Ava needed to clear her head. She pulled into a small park at the edge of the neighborhood, its entrance marked by an old wooden sign half hidden by overgrown bushes. The parking lot was empty, save for a single lamppost casting a pale yellow glow over the cracked asphalt. She parked near the light and shut off the engine, sitting in the stillness as she tried to calm the storm inside her. The silence felt oppressive. Ava could hear her own breathing, shallow and uneven, as she stared out the windshield. Her mother's face flashed in her mind, warm, smiling, alive. But the image was quickly replaced by the wreckage of the car, the twisted metal and broken glass. Ava clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She couldn't let them win. Not after everything. She grabbed her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Eliza's number. Her finger hovered over the call button, but she hesitated. Eliza had told her to call if anything felt off, but Ava didn't want to seem helpless. She was determined to handle this on her own. Still, the thought of being followed, of the text of what it meant, her chest tightened, and she hit call before she could second-guess herself again. Eliza picked up after 2 rings. "Ava." Her voice was sharp, immediately alert. "I think someone was following me," Ava said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I took a detour, and they drove past me, but I got a text." "What kind of text?" Eliza asked, her tone shifting into full detective mode. Ava hesitated, then read the message aloud. "Nice detour, but we'll find you." There was a pause on the other end of the line, but Ava could hear Eliza moving, the faint rustling of papers or fabric. When Eliza spoke again, her voice was low and serious. "Where are you right now?" "I'm at the park on—" Ava glanced at the sign outside, barely visible in the lamplight. "Woodridge and Pine, it's quiet." No one's here. Stay in your car, Eliza ordered. Doors locked, lights off. I'm on my way. Wait, Ava began, but Eliza had already hung up. She stared at her phone, feeling both reassured and exposed. The idea of Eliza coming made her feel safer, but it also meant acknowledging that she wasn't in control of the situation. And Ava hated feeling out of control. She locked her doors as instructed and turned off the interior lights, sinking into her seat as she kept watch on the lot around her. The park itself was eerily still, the faint rustle of leaves the only sound. The minutes stretched on, each one feeling like an eternity. Ava's nerves prickled, and she found herself glancing at the shadows, imagining shapes moving within them. Finally, headlights appeared in the distance, the beams cutting through the darkness as a car pulled into the lot. Ava's muscles tensed, her hand reaching instinctively for the door handle before she recognized the vehicle. Eliza's unmarked car rolled to a stop beside her, and the detective stepped out, her sharp gaze sweeping the area as she approached. Ava unlocked her door, and Eliza slid into the passenger seat. She carried the faint smell of coffee and leather, her presence both grounding and commanding. "You okay?" Eliza asked, her voice soft but serious. "I'm fine," Ava said quickly, though her trembling hands betrayed her. "It's just, they're watching me. I can feel it." Eliza nodded, pulling out her phone. "Forward me that text," she said. "We'll trace the number, see if we can figure out where it came from. But you're right, they're not just watching, they're trying to rattle you." Ava sent the message and watched as Eliza scanned it, her jaw tightening slightly. "This isn't a bluff," Eliza said after a moment. "They want you scared enough to back down. But you won't, will you?" "No," Ava said firmly, meeting Eliza's gaze. "I won't." Eliza smiled faintly, a glimmer of respect in her eyes. "Good. Because if they're trying this hard to intimidate you, it means you're getting close to something they don't want you to find." Ava's chest tightened, but this time it wasn't fear. It was resolve. The stakes were higher than ever, but she wouldn't let them break her. She couldn't, not when her mother's voice still echoed in her mind. "Trust no one. Keep going." Eliza's phone buzzed, pulling her attention away. She glanced at the screen, her expression hardening. "It's a burner number," she said. "Untraceable. Whoever sent this knows what they're doing." Ava swallowed the lump in her throat. "So what now?" "Now," Eliza said, sliding her phone back into her pocket. "We get ahead of them. Whatever evidence you're holding on to, it's time to make a plan, because if Cross and his people are this desperate, we need to hit them before they hit us." Ava nodded, her fear giving way to determination. "Let's do it." The hum of the car's engine filled the silence as Eliza drove Ava back toward her house. The streetlights blurred past, their soft glow casting fleeting shadows across Ava's face. She sat quietly in the passenger seat, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her jacket as her mind churned. The weight of the text message and the relentless shadow of Cross's influence pressed heavily on her. But Eliza's presence beside her was a tether, keeping her from spiraling. Eliza broke the silence. "We need to talk about the evidence," she said, her tone practical but tinged with urgency. "You've been careful, and I get why. But we're reaching a point where keeping it hidden could backfire. If something happens to you, Ava, that evidence could disappear." Ava's stomach tightened. She knew Eliza was right, but the idea of putting all her cards on the table felt like walking into a trap. "I'm not trying to be difficult," she said softly, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "It's just, I don't trust anyone with it yet. Not completely." Eliza glanced at her, her expression unreadable. "Not even me?" Ava hesitated, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. She thought about everything Eliza had done for her so far, the unwavering support and the sharp instincts that had saved her more than once. But trust was a fragile thing, and Ava had learned the hard way how easily it could be broken. "I trust you more than most," she admitted finally. "But this isn't just about me. It's about my mom and Ethan, and making sure that no matter what happens, the truth gets out." Eliza nodded, her gaze returning to the road. "Fair enough. But you need a contingency plan. Something airtight. If they're watching you, and clearly they are, they'll try to cut off every avenue you have. Ava swallowed hard. I have copies of everything. Files, photos, recordings. They're encrypted and stored in different places. That's smart, Eliza said, her tone approving. But make sure at least one of those copies is somewhere they'll never think to look, and someone you trust should have access to it. Ava thought of Ethan, her little brother who had already been through so much. He was too young to understand the full extent of what was happening, but he was the only family she had left. She couldn't drag him into this any more than he already was. I'll figure it out, she said quietly, more to herself than to Eliza. The car slowed as they approached Ava's neighborhood, the familiar streets lined with modest houses. Eliza pulled into the driveway and parked, the headlights cutting a path through the darkness before going dark. She turned to Ava, her expression serious but kind. Listen to me, she said. You're doing the right thing, but you're not alone in this. I know it feels like you have to carry everything by yourself, but you don't. If you need me, I'm here. Ava nodded, her throat tightening with gratitude she didn't know how to express. Thank you, she whispered. Eliza gave her a small, reassuring smile. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start figuring out how to hit back. Ava stepped out of the car, the cool night air brushing against her skin as she walked up to the front door. She unlocked it quietly, careful not to wake Ethan. The house was dark save for the faint glow of the hallway nightlight. She paused in the doorway, listening for any sound that might indicate he was awake. But the only noise was the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. She slipped into her room and closed the door behind her, leaning against it for a moment as she let out a shaky breath. The text message replayed in her mind, the words slicing through her determination like a knife. Nice detour, but we'll find you. Ava crossed the room to her desk and powered on her laptop. The screen illuminated her face as she entered her password and pulled up the encrypted files she'd spent months compiling. Photos of financial records, email exchanges, and handwritten notes filled the screen, each one a piece of the puzzle her mother had started putting together before she died. Ava stared at the files, her jaw tightening. She couldn't let fear stop her. Not now. She selected a few of the most damning documents and copied them onto a secure flash drive. Then she opened a blank email, addressed it to Eliza, and attached the files. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she typed a message. If anything happens to me, you'll know what to do. But she didn't send it. Not yet. Instead, she saved it as a draft, her mind racing with the implications of what she was about to do. It felt like placing a bet she wasn't sure she could win, but it was better than leaving everything to chance. Closing her laptop, Ava slipped the flash drive into her pocket and lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Trust no one. Keep going. She closed her eyes, willing herself to rest, but sleep didn't come easily. Outside, the shadows seemed to shift and stretch, as if the night itself was alive and waiting. Somewhere out there, Cross and his people were planning their next move. But so was Ava, and she wasn't going to let them win. The morning sunlight seeped through the edges of Ava's curtains, casting thin, golden streaks across her bedroom walls. She hadn't slept much. Her mind had been a battlefield all night, torn between fear and resolve, replaying the events in the courtroom, the chilling text and the tense conversation with Eliza. Yet as the light grew stronger, so did her determination. Today wasn't about staying quiet. It was about taking the next step. A soft knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. Ava? Ethan's small voice came from the other side. She quickly sat up, brushing her tangled hair out of her face. Come in. The door creaked open, and Ethan peeked inside, his sleepy eyes blinking against the morning light. His tousled hair and the oversized hoodie he wore made him look younger than his 12 years. Are you okay? He asked hesitantly. I heard you come in late last night. Ava managed a small smile, motioning for him to sit beside her. He climbed onto the bed, his curious gaze searching her face. I'm fine, she said, though the lie felt heavy. Just a long day. Ethan frowned, clearly not convinced. Is it about Mom? The question hit her like a wave. Ethan rarely brought up their mother. It was as if mentioning her would reopen wounds they both worked so hard to keep buried. Ava hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, she admitted softly. I'm trying to make sure what happened to her doesn't happen to anyone else. Ethan studied her, his brows furrowing in that serious way he'd picked up far too young. Is it dangerous? Ava wanted to lie, to shield him from the truth, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. A little, she said honestly. But I'm being careful. I promise. Ethan was quiet for a moment, then he reached over and hugged her tightly. Ava felt the sting of tears in her eyes but held them back, wrapping her arms around him. I miss her too, he whispered. I know, Ava said, her voice thick. I miss her every day. They sat like that for a while, the silence between them filled with unspoken pain and quiet understanding. When Ethan finally pulled away, he looked at her with a determined expression. If it's dangerous, you shouldn't do it alone. Ava smiled faintly, ruffling his hair. I'm not alone. I have help that seemed to satisfy him, at least for now. He slid off the bed and headed for the door. Breakfast is almost ready. I made toast, he said, flashing a small grin before disappearing down the hall. Ava watched him go, her chest tightening with a mix of love and guilt. Ethan was right. She couldn't do this alone. But the weight of what she was carrying felt too heavy to share completely. She glanced at her laptop, the draft email to Eliza still sitting unsent. Today, she decided, she'd finally set the plan in motion. After breakfast, Ava made her way to the coffee shop where she and Eliza had agreed to meet. The shop was quiet, the low hum of conversation blending with the hiss of the espresso machine. Ava spotted Eliza at a corner table, a cup of coffee in front of her and a stack of papers spread out across the surface. Eliza looked up as Ava approached, her sharp eyes softening slightly. Morning, she said, motioning for Ava to sit. How'd you sleep? Ava shrugged, slipping into the seat across from her. Not much, but I'm fine. Eliza studied her for a moment, then leaned back in her chair. All right, let's talk strategy. Ava pulled the flash drive from her pocket and set it on the table. This is the evidence I've been holding on to, she said. Everything my mom found before the accident. Eliza's expression grew serious as she reached for the drive, turning it over in her fingers. What's on here? Financial records, emails, recordings, Ava explained. Proof that Cross has been laundering money through shell companies for years and paying off people to cover it up. Judges, law enforcement, politicians. My mom found out, and she tried to report it. And they silenced her, Eliza finished, her voice low. She set the drive down carefully, her gaze meeting Ava's. This is big, Ava. If this gets out, it could blow his entire operation wide open. That's why I haven't released it yet, Ava said. I need to make sure it ends up in the right hands. If Cross finds out I'm sharing this, he'll come after me harder than ever. Eliza nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. We need to play this smart. If we go public too soon, he'll have time to destroy evidence, silence witnesses, and discredit you. But if we wait too long... I know, Ava said, her voice firm. That's why I need your help. I trust you to know when and how to use it. Eliza picked up the drive again, her fingers running over its surface as she considered Ava's words. All right, she said finally. I'll hold on to it for now. But I need you to promise me something. What? Ava asked. Keep your head down, Eliza said, her tone serious. Don't draw any more attention to yourself than you already have. And if anything happens, anything, you call me. Ava nodded, a small weight lifting from her shoulders. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she wasn't completely alone. I will, she said, thank you. Eliza gave her a faint smile. We're in this together now, kid. Let's make sure we get it right. As they left the coffee shop, Ava felt a flicker of hope. The fight was far from over. But for the first time, she felt like she had a real chance of winning. Cross and his allies might be powerful, but they weren't invincible. And Ava wasn't backing down. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Ava spent the afternoon at home, avoiding the outside world and trying to shake the lingering unease that seemed to follow her like a shadow. She worked quietly in her room, sorting through old notes her mother had left behind, searching for anything she might have missed. Each page felt like a glimpse into Rachel Harper's mind, a meticulous puzzle solver who had dug too deep into the wrong man's secrets. The house was quiet, save for the faint sounds of Ethan watching television in the living room. Ava glanced at the clock. It was nearing dinner time. She closed her notebook, stretched, and decided to join her brother, if only to feel less alone. As she stepped into the living room, she found Ethan sitting cross-legged on the couch, the remote in his hand as he flipped through channels. He glanced up when she entered, a grin spreading across his face. "You're just in time. I was gonna start a movie." "What movie?" Ava asked, sitting beside him and pulling a blanket over her lap. "I don't know. Something fun," Ethan said, still scrolling. "You could pick if you want." Ava smiled, shaking her head. "You pick. I'm good with anything." They settled on an old action movie, one they'd both seen before but enjoyed anyway. For a while, Ava let herself get lost in the explosions and chase scenes, laughing at Ethan's running commentary. It felt normal, almost like the weight of the past few weeks had lifted. But deep down, she knew it was temporary. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, cutting through the moment. Ava's stomach clenched as she reached for it, half expecting another anonymous message. But the screen lit up with Eliza's name and she exhaled in relief. "I'll be right back," she told Ethan, stepping into the kitchen as she answered the call. "Hey, what's up?" "Ava," Eliza said, her voice brisk. "We've got a problem." Ava's heart sank. "What kind of problem?" "I just got word from one of my contacts," Eliza said. "There's been movement in Cross's camp. He knows someone's digging into his operations, and he's already started tightening his grip. 2 whistleblowers who were set to testify against him have gone dark." Ava gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. "What do you mean, gone dark?" "I mean they've disappeared," Eliza said bluntly. "No contact with their families, no trace of them anywhere. It's like they just vanished." The knot in Ava's stomach tightened. She knew what that meant. Cross was cleaning house. And if he was willing to eliminate his own people to protect himself, he wouldn't hesitate to come after her. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "We move fast," Eliza said. "I've already started reaching out to secure a safe channel to release the evidence. But you need to be careful. If Cross knows about the files, he'll do whatever it takes to stop you." Ava's pulse quickened. "Do you think he knows?" Eliza hesitated. "I don't know, but it's better to assume he does." The line went silent for a moment as Ava processed the news. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears, a steady drumbeat of fear and adrenaline. "Should I leave?" she asked finally. "Go somewhere safe?" "No," Eliza said firmly. "If you disappear, it'll draw more attention. Stay home, stay with your brother, and keep your head down. I'll handle the rest." Ava nodded, even though Eliza couldn't see her. "Okay." "Ava," Eliza said, her tone softening. "We're going to get through this. Just trust me, all right?" "I trust you," Ava said, though her voice wavered slightly. "Thanks, Eliza." They ended the call, and Ava leaned against the counter, her head spinning. The walls of safety she'd tried so hard to build around herself and Ethan felt like they were crumbling. Cross was getting closer, and the thought of him finding them sent a chill down her spine. She returned to the living room, forcing a smile as she sat back down next to Ethan. "Sorry about that," she said, pulling the blanket over her lap again. "What did I miss?" "Not much," Ethan said, his eyes glued to the screen. "You okay?" "Yeah," Ava lied. "Just a call from a friend." Ethan nodded, but he didn't press further. Ava tried to focus on the movie, but her mind was miles away, spinning through every possible scenario. Cross was dangerous, and now more than ever, Ava knew she couldn't afford a single misstep. As the movie ended and Ethan started nodding off, Ava tucked him in on the couch and headed back to her room. She sat at her desk, staring at the encrypted files on her laptop. The weight of what she was holding felt heavier than ever, but she refused to let fear stop her. She picked up the flash drive Eliza had taken earlier that day. Another identical drive lay in her desk drawer, untouched. Ava grabbed it, slipped it into her pocket, and made a decision. It was time to prepare for every possibility, including the worst. If Cross wanted to play games, he'd find out soon enough that she wasn't backing down. The next morning, the air carried an eerie stillness that only heightened Ava's unease. She moved through her routine in a haze, pouring cereal for Ethan and brewing coffee for herself. But her mind was elsewhere. Every shadow outside the window seemed sharper, every noise from the street louder. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. Ethan was chattering about a science project at school, oblivious to her distraction. Ava nodded along, offering small responses when needed, but her thoughts were on the files, Eliza's warning, and the growing danger. When Ethan finally grabbed his backpack and headed for the door, she crouched to meet his eyes. "Be careful today, okay?" she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Ethan gave her a puzzled look. "I always am." Ava forced a smile and ruffled his hair. "Good, I'll see you later." He waved and headed out, leaving Ava alone in the quiet house. As soon as the door closed, she locked it behind him and double-checked the windows, her paranoia mounting. Cross was out there, and she couldn't afford to let her guard down. She sat at her desk, pulling out the spare flash drive she'd taken the night before. With deliberate movements, she copied a portion of the evidence onto the drive, careful to leave no digital trace of its existence. Once it was done, she slipped the drive into an envelope and wrote a name on it: Detective Eliza Moreno. Her plan was simple. If anything happened to her, Eliza would receive the evidence. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best contingency she could think of. She sealed the envelope and tucked it into her bag, her mind already racing with what else she needed to do. Later that day, Ava found herself walking toward the post office. The envelope weighed heavily in her bag, each step bringing her closer to the point of no return. She hadn't told Eliza about this backup plan. Part of her feared that even Eliza's network might not be safe. This way, if Cross made a move, at least one copy of the truth would survive. The streets were busy, the usual hum of life in the small town a stark contrast to the turmoil inside her. She scanned the crowd instinctively, her eyes flicking to every face, every car. Paranoia had become second nature, but no one seemed to pay her any attention, and she forced herself to relax. As she approached the post office, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and froze. Another text from the same unknown number. "Careful, Ava. Some secrets are better left buried." Her breath caught, her fingers tightening around the phone. The message was a clear warning, another move in Cross's game. She felt a cold sweat break out on her skin, her heart racing as she glanced around. Had someone followed her? Were they watching her now? The crowd blurred as her vision narrowed, her pulse pounding in her ears. Forcing herself to breathe, Ava pushed through the doors of the post office. The sudden quiet inside a jarring contrast to the chaos in her mind. She approached the counter and slid the envelope across to the clerk. "I need this sent with tracking," she said, her voice calm despite the storm inside her. The clerk nodded, processing the request without a second glance. Ava's fingers tapped against the counter as she waited, her eyes darting to the windows. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, but no one was there. At least no one she could see. When the clerk handed her the receipt with the tracking number, Ava tucked it into her pocket and left quickly. Her paranoia grew with every step back toward home. The envelope no longer in her possession, but its weight still heavy in her mind. She checked her phone again, scanning the message as if it might somehow reveal more. The words played over and over in her head. Some secrets are better left buried. When she arrived home, Ava locked the door behind her and leaned against it, her breathing uneven. She pulled out her phone and called Eliza, her fingers trembling slightly as she hit the call button. Eliza answered almost immediately. "Ava, what's wrong?" "They sent another message," Ava said, her voice tight. They know what I'm doing." "What did it say?" Eliza asked, her tone sharp. Ava read the message aloud, each word like a weight pressing down on her chest. Eliza was silent for a moment, then spoke with grim determination. "They're trying to scare you, Ava. They want you to stop, to doubt yourself. But they wouldn't be trying this hard if they weren't afraid of what you have." "I know," Ava said, though her voice wavered. "But what if they're right? What if this doesn't work? What if it all gets buried anyway?" "It won't," Eliza said firmly. "Not as long as we keep pushing. You've already come this far, Ava. Don't let them break you now." Ava nodded, the knot in her stomach loosening slightly. "I sent you a backup," she said, "just in case." Eliza's tone softened. "Good. That was smart. I'll make sure it's secure." "Thanks," Ava whispered, her grip on the phone tightening. I don't want to lose." "You won't," Eliza said. "We won't. But you need to stay strong, Ava. This is the part where they'll try to scare you the most. That's how you know you're getting close." Ava exhaled, a flicker of resolve reigniting inside her. "Okay," she said. "I'll stay strong." They ended the call, and Ava sat in the quiet house, her mind settling into a steely focus. Cross's warning had shaken her, but it hadn't broken her. If anything, it had only solidified her determination. Whatever secrets he wanted buried, Ava was going to dig them up. All of them. The next few days passed in a haze of tension and preparation. Ava kept herself busy, constantly refining her backup plans, double-checking her encrypted files, and strategizing with Eliza during brief, urgent calls. Each conversation carried an undercurrent of danger, the sense that the walls were closing in. By the time Friday evening rolled around, Ava felt like a coiled spring, ready to snap. She paced her room, her laptop open on her desk, displaying a secure messaging app. She had sent an encrypted file to an investigative journalist Eliza trusted, someone outside the system who couldn't be swayed by Cross's influence. But the journalist had yet to reply, and the silence gnawed at her nerves. Her phone buzzed on the desk, jolting her out of her thoughts. She snatched it up, hoping for an update from Eliza or the journalist. Instead, her screen lit up with another anonymous text. "You're running out of time, Ava. Stop now, or it won't just be you who pays the price." Ava's blood ran cold. The implication was clear. They were threatening Ethan. Her hands trembled as she reread the message, rage bubbling up inside her. She wouldn't let them touch her brother. She couldn't. Before she could dwell on the message, her phone rang, Eliza's name flashing on the screen. Ava answered quickly, her voice shaky. They sent another message. "What did it say?" Eliza asked, her voice calm but sharp. "They're threatening Ethan," Ava said, her chest tightening. "They said it won't just be me who pays the price." Eliza swore under her breath. "Okay, listen. I'll send a squad car to keep an eye on your house, and I'll make sure someone's at Ethan's school to watch him. They won't get near him, I promise." Ava exhaled shakily, the reassurance easing some of her panic. "Thank you." "But Ava," Eliza continued, her tone grim, "this means they're desperate. They know you're close to blowing everything wide open, and they're trying to scare you into stopping. Don't let them win." "I won't," Ava said, her voice steadier now. "But what do we do next? They're not just going to stop at threats." "We escalate," Eliza said. "I've been working on getting a subpoena for Cross's financial records. If we can get something concrete from his accounts, it'll corroborate your evidence and make it impossible for him to deny. But it's risky. We're playing with fire now." Ava's stomach twisted at the thought, but she knew Eliza was right. "What do you need me to do?" "Stay alert, stay safe, and keep your brother safe," Eliza said. "Let me handle the rest for now. But Ava, if you get any more threats, or if you think someone's following you, you call me immediately. Don't wait." "Okay," Ava said. "I will." They ended the call, and Ava sat back in her chair, staring at the anonymous text on her phone. Fear still gnawed at her, but so did anger. Cross thought he could control her through intimidation, but he had underestimated her resolve. She picked up the phone and deleted the text, refusing to let it rattle her further. Then she opened her laptop and began combing through the files again, searching for anything she might have missed, some detail that could strengthen the case against Cross. Hours passed as she worked, her focus sharp despite the exhaustion tugging at her. By the time she looked up, the house was dark, and the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. She glanced at the clock. Nearly midnight. Ethan was asleep in his room, safe for now. A sudden noise broke the stillness, a faint creak from the porch. Ava froze, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. She strained to listen, her mind racing. It could have been nothing, the wind, a stray animal. But after the text, she couldn't take any chances. Quietly, she reached for the baseball bat she kept under her bed and moved toward the window. She peeked through the curtain, her breath catching as she spotted a dark figure lingering near the front yard. The shadowy outline was tall, unmistakably human, and moving slowly toward the house. Ava's grip tightened on the bat as adrenaline surged through her. She backed away from the window, her mind racing. She couldn't call out to Ethan. It would only draw attention to him. Instead, she grabbed her phone and dialed Eliza. The detective answered on the first ring. "Ava." "Someone's outside," Ava whispered, her voice trembling. "They're in the yard." "Lock the doors," Eliza said immediately. "Stay inside and keep quiet. I'm sending backup. They'll be there in 5 minutes." Ava nodded, even though Eliza couldn't see her. "What if they try to get in?" "Then you do whatever you have to do to stay safe," Eliza said, her tone fierce. "Don't let them near you or Ethan. Help is on the way." The line went dead, and Ava clutched the phone in one hand and the bat in the other. She crept toward the front door, checking the locks to make sure they were secure. Her pulse raced as she heard another creak, this one closer. The shadow was on the porch now. She stepped back, her eyes darting to the hallway where Ethan's room was. If the worst happened, she needed to protect him. Her hands tightened around the bat as she braced herself, the shadow moving closer to the door. Then suddenly, the sound of sirens filled the air, piercing through the night. Red and blue lights flashed outside, casting flickering colors across the walls. Ava exhaled in relief as the shadow bolted, disappearing into the darkness just as a police car pulled into the driveway. She opened the door cautiously, her heart still pounding as 2 officers stepped out, their flashlights cutting through the yard. One of them approached her, his expression calm but serious. "Are you all right, Miss Harper?" Ava nodded, her voice shaky. "I'm fine. I think they're gone." The officer nodded. "We'll secure the area. Detective Moreno will be here shortly." As the officers began their search, Ava stepped back inside, locking the door behind her. Her hands still trembled, but her fear was laced with something else now. Anger. Cross had sent a warning, but she wasn't backing down. She wouldn't stop until the truth came out, no matter what it cost her. By the time Eliza arrived, the adrenaline had faded, leaving Ava drained but still on edge. The detective stepped out of her car, her expression sharp and alert as she approached the front door. Ava opened it before she could knock, her hands still trembling despite her best efforts to appear calm. "Eliza," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They were here." "I know," Eliza replied, stepping inside and closing the door firmly behind her. Her gaze swept over the room, taking in the bat still clutched in Ava's hand, and the nervous energy that seemed to cling to every corner of the house. "Are you and Ethan okay?" Ava nodded, her throat tight. "He's asleep. He didn't hear anything." "Good." Eliza set her bag down and pulled out a notepad, jotting something quickly before looking back at Ava. "The officers couldn't find anyone, but that doesn't mean they're gone for good. Whoever it was, they wanted to scare you, and it looks like they succeeded." "They did more than scare me," Ava said, her voice hardening. "They made me angry." Eliza raised an eyebrow, her expression softening slightly. "Good, use that. But don't let it make you reckless." Ava took a deep breath, nodding. "What now? Do we wait for them to try again?" "No," Eliza said firmly. "We go on the offensive. I've been working on this case long enough to know that Cross only plays this aggressively when he's cornered. He knows we're close to something big. Ava swallowed, the weight of the moment settling over her. What do we do? Eliza glanced at her phone, pulling up a series of encrypted messages. I've been in contact with the journalist you sent those files to. They've been corroborating the evidence and digging into Cross's network. If they can verify everything, we'll have enough to blow this wide open. But what if Cross shuts it down? Ava asked. He's already silencing people. What if he gets to them before they can publish? Eliza's jaw tightened. That's a risk we're taking, but it's not just about the journalist. I've also filed for a warrant to raid Cross's main office. If we can get in before he has time to destroy anything, we'll have even more proof. Enough to make it impossible for him to buy his way out. When? Ava asked, her pulse quickening. Tomorrow morning, Eliza said. It's a coordinated effort. The journalist will publish at the same time we execute the raid. It'll hit him from every angle. Ava nodded slowly, her mind racing. Tomorrow. It felt too soon, yet not soon enough. She thought of Ethan, asleep in the next room, and the risk this plan carried. If they failed, Cross wouldn't just retaliate, he'd crush them. But if they succeeded, it would mean justice for her mother, for the whistleblowers who had been silenced, and for everyone Cross had hurt. I'm in, she said, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling beneath the surface. Whatever you need me to do, I'll do it. Eliza smiled faintly, a glimmer of pride in her eyes. You've already done more than enough, Ava. Now it's our turn. I'll stay here tonight just in case you try to get some sleep. Ava wanted to argue, to insist that she could stay up and help plan, but exhaustion was already pulling at her. She nodded, heading toward her room but stopping at the doorway. Eliza, she said, turning back. Thank you for everything. Eliza waved her off with a small smile. Go get some rest, kid. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. The morning arrived with a tense stillness that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Ava woke to the sound of Eliza moving around the house, checking locks and speaking in hushed tones on the phone. Ethan was still asleep, and Ava took a moment to watch him, his peaceful face a stark contrast to the chaos swirling outside their small bubble of safety. By the time Eliza called her into the kitchen, Ava felt the weight of what was coming. The detective had spread out a map of Cross's main office on the table, marking key points with red circles. The raid team is ready, Eliza said, and the journalist has confirmed they're publishing at 9 a.m. sharp. All we need to do now is wait for the signal. Ava nodded, her stomach churning with nervous energy. She wanted to ask 100 questions, to go over every detail of the plan, but she knew Eliza had it under control. Instead, she sat quietly, her fingers tracing the edge of the table as she waited. At exactly 9 a.m., Eliza's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then looked up at Ava, her expression resolute. It's time. The hours that followed felt like a blur. Ava stayed by the phone, anxiously awaiting updates as Eliza coordinated with the raid team. Reports came in sporadically. Files seized, computers confiscated, evidence piling up against Cross and his empire. By midday, the first wave of headlines hit the internet, the journalist's expose spreading like wildfire. Billionaire William Cross exposed, decades of corruption and cover-ups revealed. Ava read the headline on her phone, her hands shaking as relief and disbelief washed over her. They had done it. The truth was finally out. Eliza returned that evening, her face tired but triumphant. We got him, she said, dropping her bag onto the couch. Cross is in custody, and with the evidence we've collected, there's no way he's walking away from this. Ava sank into a chair, her chest heaving as the weight of the past few months finally lifted. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to breathe. You did it, Ava, Eliza said, her voice filled with pride. You brought him down. No, Ava said softly, a small smile playing at her lips. We did. Eliza nodded, her expression softening. Now go spend some time with your brother, you've earned it. Ava stood and headed to Ethan's room, her heart lighter than it had been in months. The fight was over, and they had won. Justice had been served, and Rachel Harper's voice, silenced for so long, was finally heard. But as she sat beside Ethan and watched him laugh at a cartoon on his tablet, Ava knew this wasn't the end. Cross had been powerful, but there were others like him, people who thrived on secrecy and corruption. Ava had seen what the truth could do, and she wasn't afraid of the fight anymore. This was only the beginning.